From the AFRTS News Center in Washington, this is the 2-Minute Report.
Today I'm sending the Congress a wartime supplemental appropriations request of $74.7 billion to fund needs directly arising from the Iraqi conflict and our global war against terror.
President Bush made that announcement Tuesday during a visit to the Pentagon. The administration followed the budget supplemental announcement with a round of testimony before Congress. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld told the Senate Appropriations Committee on Thursday, even if we hadn't gone to war with Iraq, we would still need more money.
If the regime had agreed voluntarily to disarm and prevent a war, the cost of sustaining that military pressure through the rest of the fiscal year would have been in excess of $40 billion. So even without a war, the cost of disarming Iraq would have been significant.
The Secretary said in addition to the money needed for the war, the Defense Department also needs flexibility to spend it where it's most needed.
Just as the military plan that General Franks has developed has flexibility built into it so that our forces can deal with unexpected events in the battlefield, our budget plan must also have flexibility to deal with the changing circumstances on the ground.
The Secretary reiterated that he can't predict how long the war will last.
What I do know is that whatever it ends up costing, it will be small compared to the cost in lives and treasure of another attack like the one we experienced on September 11th, or a weapons of mass destruction attack that could be far worse.
The Secretary said we are in Iraq to do everything we can to prevent such an attack, and this budget supplemental is essential to that effort. That's the 2-Minute Report. I'm Warren Lee.
This is an AFRTS News Minute. U.S. military operations in Iraq are going according to plan, with coalition forces growing each day. That assessment Thursday from Brigadier General Vincent Brooks, operations officer for U.S. Central Command.
Day by day, we significantly diminish the regime's ability to command and control its forces. As we do, we witness the regime's forces becoming more and more desperate in their actions.
General Brooks said the discovery of thousands of Iraqi chemical protection suits, while a cause for concern, will not change the way the war is prosecuted.
It certainly reminds us of the reality of this risk that we've been speaking about for so long. What it does for us also is it causes us to take notice and be more ready.
General Brooks said the coalition expects and demands that Iraq abide by the Geneva Conventions. That's an AFRTS News Minute.
This is an AFRTS News Minute. President George W. Bush and British Prime Minister Tony Blair said Thursday they remain totally committed to removing Saddam Hussein from power, and military operations in Iraq will continue for as long as it takes. Following discussions at the presidential retreat at Camp David, Maryland, each of the leaders said the day of liberation for the Iraqi people draws near.
Slowly but surely, the grip of terror around the throats of the Iraqi people is being loosened.
Saddam Hussein and his hateful regime will be removed from power. Iraq will be disarmed of weapons of mass destruction, and the Iraqi people will be free.
Both leaders said they've urged the United Nations to immediately resume Iraq's oil for food program. That's an AFRTS News Minute.
Through the eyes of military photographers, this is Combat Camera. A very welcomed sight for some Iraqi civilians, U.S. Marines. These leathernecks were warmly greeted by Iraqis before continuing to make their way toward Baghdad as part of their ongoing support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. But it's not just civilians that the Marines run into. They also deal with a stream of Iraqi soldiers who decide to surrender and lay down their weapons. In addition, coalition forces were able to seize the weapons and ammunition of the enemy prisoners of war. Meanwhile, at sea, forces worked through the night to do their part to help with the fight against terrorism. USS Bonham Richard and her embarked Harriers support Marine ground combat operations. These sailors discuss flight operations in between launches that send aircraft off on new missions. That's Combat Camera.
On the timeline, today is March 31st. On this day in 1833, when fire destroyed Treasury Department buildings in Washington, Marines stationed in the capital city were assigned to guard tax money kept there. On March 31st, 1854, the Navy's Commodore Matthew Perry negotiated the Treaty of Kanagawa, opening trade relations between the United States and Japan. On this day in 1933, with U.S. unemployment at 13.5 million, President Franklin Roosevelt created the Civilian Conservation Corps. Army leaders supervised more than 500,000 young CCC volunteers working in forests, parks, and on rangelands. On March 31st, 1966, the Air Force's Strategic Air Command phased out the last B-47 Stratojet bomber. The first all-jet strategic bomber had been in active service for 15 years. For March 31st, that's today's timeline.